Thank God he left you. Now pack your bags and get out of our family, said my son after my divorce. My daughter-in-law screamed, "Now the company is ours, and you'll rot on the streets." I just smiled. What I did next cost them everything. I should have known something was terribly wrong the moment Daniel opened the front door. My son, my only child, the boy I raised alone after his father walked out when he was 12, looked at me like I was a door-to-door salesman interrupting his dinner. No hug, no concerned questions about how I was holding up after the divorce papers were finally signed. Just cold, calculating eyes that I didn't recognize. "Mom." His voice was flat, emotionless. "We weren't expecting you." Behind him, Jessica appeared, perfectly styled as always, her blonde hair swept into that expensive salon style that cost more than most people's grocery budget.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
She wore a silk blouse I'd never seen before, and diamond earrings that caught the porch light. New jewelry, expensive jewelry. "Olivia," she said, my name dripping from her lips like she was tasting something unpleasant. How unexpected. I stood there on their doorstep, clutching my overnight bag, feeling more alone than I had in the entire 18 months of divorce proceedings. I'd lost my husband of 30 years to his 20-something secretary, lost half of everything I'd worked for, and now I was looking for some comfort from my family. Some basic human decency. "I was hoping I could stay here for a few days," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "Just until I figure things out. The apartment I'm looking at won't be ready until next week, and I thought maybe—" Daniel exchanged a look with Jessica. One of those married couple communications that happens in silence, full of meaning I wasn't privy to. Jessica gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Actually, Mom, this is perfect timing." Daniel stepped aside, not to welcome me in, but to give Jessica room to move forward. "We need to talk to you about some things. Come in." The living room had changed since my last visit 3 months ago. Gone were the family photos that used to line the mantel, replaced by abstract art pieces that screamed expensive gallery. The comfortable couch where I used to read stories to my grandchildren had been replaced by a stark white leather sectional that looked like it belonged in a museum, not a family home. "Sit," Jessica commanded, gesturing to a hard-backed chair positioned opposite the sectional like I was being interviewed. Daniel sat beside his wife, their united front unmistakable. I lowered myself into the chair, my overnight bag still clutched in my hands like a security blanket. Something was happening here, something that made my stomach clench with dread. "Where are Emma and Tyler?" I asked, suddenly realizing I hadn't heard my grandchildren's voices, hadn't seen them peek around corners to greet their grandmother. "At Jessica's mother's house," Daniel replied curtly. "We thought it would be better if they weren't here for this conversation." This conversation. As if my seeking temporary shelter required a family meeting. Jessica leaned forward, her manicured hands clasped together. "Olivia, we've been talking, Daniel and I, and we think it's time for some honesty." My mouth went dry. "What kind of honesty?" Daniel cleared his throat, and suddenly he wasn't my son anymore. He was a stranger wearing my child's face, speaking in the cold, corporate tone he'd learned from years of watching his stepfather run business meetings. "The truth is, Mom, we've been waiting for this day for a very long time. Waiting for you and Robert to finally split up so we could move forward with our lives without his interference. Robert, my ex-husband, the man who had adopted Daniel when he was 13 and given him opportunities I never could have provided alone. The man who built the family business from nothing and included Daniel as a full partner, grooming him to eventually take over." "I don't understand," I whispered, though part of me was beginning to. Jessica's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Oh, honey, you really don't see it, do you? You never saw anything that was happening right in front of your face. We've been planning this for 3 years, Daniel continued, his voice gaining confidence as he saw my confusion. "Ever since Robert started talking about retiring and handing everything over to you. We couldn't let that happen. You don't understand business, Mom. You'd run everything into the ground within a year." My hands began to shake. The divorce? You wanted us to divorce? Jessica laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. Wanted it? Sweetie? We helped it along? Who do you think introduced Robert to that little secretary of his? Who do you think suggested he hire her in the first place? Who do you think made sure she was working late all those nights when he needed help with the quarterly reports? The room began to spin. My own son, my own daughter-in-law. They had orchestrated the destruction of my marriage. But why? The words came out as barely a breath. Daniel stood up, pacing to the window like he was delivering a presentation. Because, Mom, you were in the way. The company should have been mine years ago. I'm the one with the business degree. I'm the one who understands the market, who has the vision to expand. But Robert kept you involved in everything, kept talking about leaving it all to you because you were his wife. I never wanted the company, I said, tears starting to blur my vision. I would have given it to you. You know that. You're my son. Would you have? Jessica's voice was mocking. Or would you have played the grieving widow, holding on to power because it was all you had left of your precious Robert? The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This woman I'd welcomed into my family, whose wedding I'd helped plan, whose children I'd babysat countless times, was talking to me like I was garbage. Daniel turned back to face me, and his expression was triumphant. It doesn't matter now anyway. The divorce is final. Robert signed over his shares to me as part of the settlement. The company is mine now, Mom. Everything is mine. So, where does that leave me? I asked, though I was starting to understand exactly where it left me. Jessica stood up, smoothing down her silk blouse. Well, that's the thing, Olivia. We've been thinking about this, and we realize there's really no place for you in our new life. Daniel is going to be running a major corporation now. We'll be moving in different social circles, entertaining important clients. We need to project a certain image. What are you saying? She's saying, Daniel's voice was harder now, crueler, that we can't have you embarrassing us. Look at you, Mom. Look at how you dress, how you carry yourself. You're a secretary who married above her station, and now that marriage is over, you need to accept reality. I looked down at myself, at my simple department store dress and sensible shoes, clothes I'd always worn, clothes that had been perfectly acceptable when I was supporting my son as a single mother, working 2 jobs to keep us afloat. I raised you, I whispered. I gave you everything. And we're grateful, Jessica said, her tone suggesting anything but gratitude. But that was then. This is now. And now, frankly, you're an embarrassment we can't afford. Daniel walked to the front door and opened it. I think it's time for you to go, Mom. I stared at him, this stranger who had somehow replaced my son. Go where? Anywhere but here, Jessica called from the living room. Figure it out. You're a grown woman. I stood on shaking legs, my overnight bag feeling impossibly heavy. As I walked toward the door, I passed the hallway where school pictures of Emma and Tyler still hung. My grandchildren, who I might never see again if these two had their way. At the threshold, I turned back one last time. The company meant everything to Robert. He built it for family, for you, Daniel. My son's face was stone. Then he should have left it to me directly instead of playing games. And you should have been the man I raised instead of... I gestured helplessly at the stranger before me. As I stepped onto the porch, Jessica called out one final cruelty. Oh, and Olivia, don't bother coming back. We're having the locks changed tomorrow. You're not family anymore. The door slammed shut behind me with such finality that it echoed in my bones. I stood there in the gathering darkness, holding my pathetic overnight bag, facing the complete destruction of everything I'd believed about my life. My marriage was over. My son was gone, replaced by a greedy stranger. My daughter-in-law had revealed herself to be a calculating manipulator. My grandchildren were being kept from me. But as I walked to my car, something unexpected began to bloom in my chest. Not despair, not defeat, but something that felt almost like anticipation. They thought they knew everything. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming for them. The Sunset Motel wasn't exactly where I'd imagined spending my first week as a divorced woman, but it was all I could afford on short notice. $28 a night, weekly rates available, and a neon sign that flickered between vacancy and no vacancy, like it couldn't make up its mind. The room smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, but at least it had a lock on the door and nobody telling me I wasn't welcome. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. 3 hours ago, I'd walked into what I thought was my family's home looking for comfort and support. Instead, I'd discovered that my own son and daughter-in-law had orchestrated the destruction of my marriage like it was some kind of corporate takeover. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was how proud they'd looked while they were explaining it to me, like they were presenting a successful business plan to impressed investors. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Helen. Saw moving trucks at Daniel's house today. Big ones. Everything okay? Moving trucks. They weren't wasting any time settling into their new life. I wondered if they were already shopping for new furniture to go with their new fortune, new cars to match their elevated status. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a motel room trying to figure out how I was going to rebuild my life at 62 years old. I opened my laptop, the one Robert had bought me for our last anniversary, back when we were still pretending our marriage could be saved. The familiar chime as it started up was somehow comforting in all this chaos. 3 new emails waited in my inbox. The first was from my divorce attorney, confirming that all papers had been filed and the settlement was final. The second was a notification from my bank about a large withdrawal from our joint business account. A very large withdrawal. The third email made my blood run cold. It was from Patricia Williams, who'd worked in our company's accounting department for 15 years. The subject line read, "Urgent. Please call me." I dialed her number with trembling fingers. "Mrs. Morrison? Thank God you called." Patricia's voice was strained, anxious. "I didn't know if I should contact you directly, but I didn't know who else to turn to." "What's wrong, Patricia?" "It's Daniel and Jessica. They showed up at the office this morning with papers saying they're taking over operations immediately. They've been making changes all day. Big changes. Expensive changes." My stomach dropped. "What kind of changes?" "They fired 3 people right off the bat. Good people who've been with us for years. Then Jessica started talking about redecorating the entire office, bringing in some fancy designer. She's already ordered new furniture for the executive suite. And Daniel, Mrs. Morrison, he called a meeting with all the department heads and basically told them he's implementing a completely new business strategy." I closed my eyes, trying to stay calm. Did they say anything about the existing contracts? The ongoing projects? That's what's really worrying me. They seem to think they can just change everything overnight. Daniel was talking about dropping the Hendricks account because he says it's small-time thinking. "Mrs. Morrison, the Hendricks account is 30% of our annual revenue." 30%. They were about to destroy a relationship that had taken Robert 12 years to build, and they didn't even understand what they were throwing away. "Patricia, I need you to do something for me. Can you document everything they're doing? Every decision, every change, every expenditure. Keep detailed records." "Of course, but Mrs. Morrison, are you coming back? A lot of us were hoping, we know about the divorce, but we were hoping you might still be involved in the company somehow." The hope in her voice broke something inside me. These people had worked with me for years. They'd seen me grow from Robert's secretary to his partner in every sense of the word. They trusted me, respected me, and now they were watching everything they'd helped build get dismantled by 2 people who didn't understand the first thing about what made the business work. "I don't know yet, Patricia. Just keep those records for me, okay? And Patricia, don't let them know we talked." After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my motel room, trying to piece together the scope of what Daniel and Jessica were planning. It wasn't enough for them to push me out of the family. They wanted to erase every trace of the life Robert and I had built together, remake everything in their own image. My phone rang again. This time it was my sister Marie, calling from Phoenix. "Olivia, honey, I just heard about the divorce being finalized. How are you holding up?" The kindness in her voice almost undid me. "Not great, Marie. It's been a difficult day. Are you at Daniel's? I know you were planning to stay with them while you figured things out." I laughed, a sound that came out more bitter than I intended. That didn't exactly work out as planned. I told her everything. The calculated cruelty, the orchestrated betrayal, the way they'd looked at me like I was nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Marie listened in stunned silence. Those ungrateful little... she started, then caught herself. I'm sorry, I know he's your son, but Olivia, what they did is unforgivable. The worst part is, I think they actually believe they're justified, like they're just claiming what was rightfully theirs all along. Where are you staying tonight? I looked around my dingy motel room. Somewhere temporary. I'll figure it out. You could come here. Phoenix is beautiful this time of year, and you could stay as long as you need to. The offer was tempting. Escape to Arizona, start fresh somewhere, nobody knew about my failures, my humiliations. But something held me back. I appreciate it, Marie, but I'm not ready to run away yet. After we hung up, I opened my laptop again and started going through my files. Years of business records, contracts, correspondence. Robert had always insisted on keeping detailed documentation of everything, and I'd learned to do the same. As I scrolled through folder after folder, a pattern began to emerge, something I'd never really paid attention to before, but now seemed significant. Most of our major clients, our most profitable accounts, had been established through relationships I'd developed. The Hendricks account that Daniel was so eager to drop? I'd landed that contract at a charity fundraiser where I'd spent 2 hours talking to Mrs. Hendricks about her late husband's business philosophy. The Morrison Group's 3 biggest industrial contracts had all come through networking I'd done, connections I'd made. I pulled up the incorporation documents, the partnership agreements, the carefully structured business arrangements that Robert had put in place over the years, documents that Daniel had probably never bothered to read carefully, assuming they said what he wanted them to say. But Robert had been a thorough man, a careful man, and he'd loved me enough to protect me. Even if I hadn't realized I needed protecting, I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Marcus Webb, Robert's attorney and longtime friend. It was late, but Marcus had always told me to call if I needed anything, day or night. He answered on the second ring. Olivia, is everything all right? Marcus, I need to ask you something about the business structure. About how Robert set everything up legally. There was a pause. Are you somewhere you can talk privately? I looked around my empty motel room and almost laughed. Privacy isn't a problem right now. Good, because what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything. Olivia, what I'm about to tell you should have been explained years ago, but Robert made me promise to keep it confidential unless absolutely necessary. Marcus's voice was careful, measured. I think we've reached that point. I gripped the phone tighter, my heart pounding. What are you talking about? The business structure Robert created wasn't what it appeared to be on the surface. Morrison Industries, the company Daniel thinks he inherited, is actually a subsidiary of Morrison Holdings. And Morrison Holdings has always been, and remains, entirely in your name. The words didn't make sense at first. I stared at the water-stained ceiling of my motel room, trying to process what he was telling me. I don't understand, Marcus. Robert always handled the business side of things. I was just involved in operations, client relations. That's what you were supposed to think. That's what everyone was supposed to think. But Robert was more strategic than people gave him credit for. He set up Morrison Holdings 15 years ago as the parent company, with you as the sole owner. Morrison Industries, where Daniel worked, where you both worked, was just the operating subsidiary. My mouth went dry. Why would he do that? Marcus sighed. He was protecting you, Olivia. He'd been through 1 divorce before he met you, lost everything to his first wife. He wasn't going to let that happen again, and more importantly, he wasn't going to let it happen to you. He told me once that you were the real heart of the business anyway, that your relationships with clients were what made everything work. I thought about all those years of client dinners, charity events, networking functions. Robert always said I was better with people than he was, that I had a gift for making business feel personal. I'd thought he was just being kind. So, what does this mean exactly? It means that Daniel inherited operational control of a subsidiary that can't function without the parent company. All the major contracts, all the valuable assets, the real estate, the equipment leasing agreements, they're all held by Morrison Holdings. Your company. The room seemed to spin around me. The office building. leased to Morrison Industries by Morrison Holdings. At very favorable terms, I might add. The warehouse facilities? Same arrangement. The client contracts? Technically, all the major ones are held by the parent company and subcontracted to Morrison Industries. I stood up from the bed, pacing the small confines of the motel room. Marcus, are you telling me that Daniel doesn't actually own anything real? I'm telling you that he owns a company that's entirely dependent on its parent company for everything that matters. And you own the parent company. The implications hit me like a freight train. All day, I'd been devastated by Daniel and Jessica's betrayal, by their casual cruelty, by the way they'd dismissed me like I was nothing. But they'd been operating under a massive misconception. Does Daniel know any of this? Robert never told him the details. He kept saying he would explain everything when the time was right. But then the divorce proceedings started, and he was so angry about the whole situation. Marcus paused. He was going to tell you everything after the divorce was final. He had it all planned out. But then the heart attack happened so suddenly. Robert's heart attack. 3 weeks after our divorce was finalized, just as he was starting to talk about the future, about making sure I was protected, I'd thought it was the stress of our broken marriage that killed him. Maybe it was the stress of keeping secrets he should have shared years ago. Olivia, there's something else you need to know. The withdrawal from the business account that you saw today, that came from Morrison Industries operating funds, not from Morrison Holdings. What's the difference? The difference is that Morrison Industries has a very limited operating budget. It's enough to run day-to-day operations, pay salaries, handle routine expenses. But if they're making major purchases, planning expensive renovations, hiring consultants, Marcus's voice took on a warning tone. They're going to run through their available funds very quickly. I thought about Patricia's call, about the firing of experienced employees, the expensive office renovations, Daniel's plans to completely restructure the business. How long before they realize they're in trouble? At the rate they're spending, I'd say they have about 3 weeks before they hit serious cash flow problems. Maybe less if they keep making the kind of decisions Patricia described to me. Patricia had called Marcus, too. Of course she had. She'd worked closely with Robert for 15 years. She knew who to contact when things started going wrong. There's one more thing. Olivia. Robert left very specific instructions in case this kind of situation ever arose. He anticipated that there might come a time when you'd need to assert your authority over the parent company. What kind of instructions? Complete documentation of the corporate structure, financial records going back 15 years, and a letter explaining his reasoning for setting things up this way. Everything is in a safe deposit box that only you have access to. He gave me the key to give to you when the time was right. I sat back down on the bed, overwhelmed. I can't believe he never told me any of this. He wanted to protect you from having to make difficult decisions about Daniel while Robert was still alive. He hoped Daniel would mature, would prove himself worthy of eventually inheriting everything. But he also wanted to make sure you had options if that didn't happen. Options. For the first time since I'd stood on Daniel's doorstep 12 hours ago, I felt like I had options. Marcus, I need to see those documents. I'll meet you at the bank first thing in the morning. But Olivia, before you make any decisions, you need to understand what you're dealing with. If you assert your authority as the owner of Morrison Holdings, you'll be in complete control of Daniel's livelihood. You could shut down Morrison Industries tomorrow if you wanted to. The power of that was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. What would you do, Marcus, if you were in my position? He was quiet for a long moment. I'd remember that Robert built this structure to protect you, not to give you weapons against your own son. But I'd also remember that your son just threw you out of his house after orchestrating the destruction of your marriage. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat in the darkness of my motel room, thinking about the last 15 years of my life. All those times Robert had insisted on handling the paperwork, the legal details, the corporate filings. I thought he was just being protective, maybe a little old-fashioned about business matters. But he'd been playing a much longer game than I'd realized. My phone buzzed with a text message. Daniel, hope you found somewhere decent to stay tonight. Jessica and I have been talking and we think maybe we were a little harsh earlier. If you're willing to be reasonable about your expectations, we might be able to work something out. I stared at the message for a long time. 12 hours ago, that text would have filled me with relief and gratitude. My son was reaching out, offering reconciliation, suggesting that maybe we could rebuild our relationship. Now I saw it for what it really was. They'd spent the day playing with their new toy, spending money and making grand plans, and someone had probably started asking uncomfortable questions about budgets and cash flow. Maybe Patricia had pushed back on some of their more extravagant ideas. Maybe they'd realized that running a business was more complicated than they'd thought. I typed back a simple response. "I'll think about it." But as I turned off the light and settled into the uncomfortable motel bed, I wasn't thinking about reconciliation. I was thinking about justice. I was thinking about consequences. I was thinking about what it would feel like to watch their faces when they realized that the woman they'd thrown away like garbage was the only thing standing between them and complete financial ruin. Tomorrow, I would see those documents. Tomorrow, I would understand the full scope of the power Robert had placed in my hands. And then Daniel and Jessica would learn what it really meant to be family. The documents spread across Marcus's conference table told the story of 15 years of careful planning. Robert hadn't just protected me, he'd built me an empire disguised as a marriage partnership. Morrison Holdings owned everything that mattered: the office building, the warehouse facilities, the major equipment leases, and most importantly, the contracts with our 3 largest clients. "This is remarkable," I said, running my finger down the list of assets. "The Hendricks account, the Patterson Group, Morrison Manufacturing. They're all contracted directly with Holdings, not Industries." Marcus nodded grimly. Robert renegotiated those contracts 5 years ago during the recession. He told everyone it was for tax purposes, but really he was consolidating control under your company, my company. The words still felt strange, but increasingly powerful. "What's Daniel's actual financial position right now?" Marcus pulled out a calculator and started running numbers. Based on what Patricia reported yesterday, they've already spent about $60,000 on office renovations, fired 3 employees but hired 2 consultants at premium rates, and committed to a new marketing campaign that'll cost another $40,000. Meanwhile, Morrison Industries' operating account had maybe $90,000 when they started their spending spree. So they'll be broke within 2 weeks. Sooner if they keep going at this pace. And that's assuming Morrison Holdings continues to fulfill the subcontracting agreements that provide Industries with its revenue stream. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. What happens if Morrison Holdings cancels those subcontracting agreements? Morrison Industries would have no clients, no revenue, and no way to pay their obligations. They'd be forced into bankruptcy within 30 days. The power of that was intoxicating. Yesterday, I'd been a discarded wife sleeping in a motel. Today, I held my son's entire future in my hands. My phone buzzed with another text from Daniel. "Mom, we really need to talk today. Some confusion about the business arrangements. Can you come to the office around 2? Confusion about the business arrangements. Someone had clearly started asking the right questions. "I think it's time for me to pay a visit to my company," I told Marcus. I arrived at Morrison Industries just after lunch, parking in the spot that had always been reserved for Robert. The lobby looked different already. Jessica had replaced our warm, welcoming furniture with stark modern pieces that looked impressive but felt cold. A young receptionist I didn't recognize looked up as I entered. "I'm sorry. Visiting hours are by appointment only," she said with practiced politeness. "I'm not visiting," I replied calmly. "I'm Olivia Morrison, and I own this building." Her confusion was evident, but before she could respond, Patricia appeared from the elevator. Her face lit up with relief when she saw me. "Mrs. Morrison, thank goodness you're here. We need to talk." She led me to the small conference room, glancing around nervously. "Things have gotten worse since yesterday. Daniel fired Mr. Peterson from accounting this morning because he questioned a purchase order. And Jessica, Mrs. Morrison, where are they now?" "Daniel's in meetings with potential investors. He's trying to raise capital for something he calls aggressive expansion. Jessica's at the design center picking out artwork. Potential investors. He was already trying to find outside funding because he was burning through his available cash." The desperation was setting in faster than even Marcus had predicted. Patricia, I need you to prepare termination notices for all subcontracting agreements between Morrison Holdings and Morrison Industries. Make them effective Monday morning. Her eyes widened. All of them? Every single one. Morrison Holdings will be taking direct control of all client relationships as of next week. I spent the next 2 hours in Patricia's office, reviewing every detail of the business operations. The picture that emerged was even worse than I'd imagined. Daniel and Jessica weren't just spending money recklessly. They were dismantling relationships that had taken decades to build. The Hendricks account. They'd already insulted Mrs. Hendricks by suggesting her late husband's business model was outdated. The Patterson Group was questioning whether they wanted to continue working with Morrison Industries after Daniel had criticized their conservative approach to growth. Morrison Manufacturing, our most stable client, was concerned about the sudden change in personnel and management philosophy. At 4 o'clock, Daniel burst into Patricia's office where I was working. His face was flushed, his expensive suit wrinkled from what had clearly been a stressful afternoon. "Mom, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be in the building without permission." I looked up from the financial reports spread across the desk. "Permission from whom?" "From me. I own this company now." "Actually, Daniel, you own Morrison Industries. This building belongs to Morrison Holdings, which belongs to me." The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" Patricia quietly excused herself, leaving us alone in the conference room. I gestured for Daniel to sit down, but he remained standing, his hands clenched into fists. "I'm talking about the corporate structure your stepfather created to protect both of us. Morrison Industries is a subsidiary of Morrison Holdings. Always has been. And I'm the sole owner of Morrison Holdings. That's impossible. Dad left everything to me in the divorce settlement." "He left you Morrison Industries. He never owned Morrison Holdings to give away." I pulled out the incorporation documents Marcus had shown me. "Would you like to see the paperwork?" Daniel snatched the documents, his eyes scanning the pages frantically. I watched his expression change from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror as the reality sank in. "This can't be legal. There has to be some mistake." "No mistake. Your stepfather was very thorough. He wanted to make sure I was protected, and he wanted to see if you could prove yourself worthy of eventually inheriting everything." Daniel slumped into a chair, the papers scattered in front of him. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand what you threw away yesterday when you decided I wasn't family anymore." I gathered up the documents calmly. "As of Monday morning, Morrison Holdings will be terminating all subcontracting agreements with Morrison Industries. You'll be responsible for fulfilling your existing commitments with whatever resources you have available." "You can't do that. We'll lose everything." "Yes, you will. But I'm your son." The hypocrisy of it was breathtaking. Yesterday I wasn't family. Today, when his financial future was threatened, suddenly I was his mother again. Yesterday you told me I was an embarrassment who didn't belong in your new life. Today you want to claim family loyalty? I stood up, smoothing down my simple department store dress. "Let me ask you something, Daniel. When you were planning my divorce with Jessica, when you were introducing Robert to his secretary, when you were calculating how to get me out of the way, did you think of me as your mother then?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "I didn't think so." My phone buzzed with a call from Jessica. Daniel answered it on speaker, his voice shaking. "Jess, we have a problem. A big problem." "What kind of problem?" "I'm looking at marble countertops for the executive kitchen, and I need your approval for the—" "Stop spending money," he shouted. "Don't buy anything else. Don't sign any more contracts. Just come to the office right now." After he hung up, we sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "What will it take? What do you want from us?" I looked at this man who used to be my little boy, who I'd raised alone for 13 years before Robert came into our lives. Yesterday, he'd looked at me like I was garbage. Today, he was begging for mercy. "I want you to learn what I learned yesterday, Daniel. What it feels like to have everything you thought you could count on disappear in a single conversation." When Jessica arrived 20 minutes later, her designer heels clicking on the marble lobby floor, She walked into a conversation that would shatter her world just as completely as mine had been shattered 24 hours earlier. Jessica swept into the conference room like she owned the place, her arms full of fabric samples and design portfolios. She was still living in yesterday's world, where she was the wife of a successful businessman, and I was the discarded mother-in-law they'd thrown away like garbage. Daniel, you're being dramatic. The marble countertops are an investment in our company's image, and I found the most gorgeous Italian tiles for— She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me sitting calmly at the conference table. Her expression shifted from confusion to irritation. What is she doing here? Sit down, Jessica. Daniel's voice was hollow, defeated. We need to talk. She remained standing, her designer heels planted firmly on the marble floor, her chin raised in defiance. If this is about yesterday, Olivia, I think you're being unnecessarily dramatic. Family disagreements happen. We can work through this like adults, can we? I asked quietly. Tell me, Jessica, how exactly do adults work through orchestrating someone's divorce for financial gain? Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flicker of fear that crossed her face, but she recovered quickly. I don't know what you're talking about. The secretary, Jessica. Robert's secretary, who you recommended he hire. The one who was working late with him all those nights when you suggested he needed extra help with the quarterly reports. Daniel was staring at his wife with growing horror. Jessica, tell me you didn't. She lifted her chin higher, defiant to the end. I did what was necessary for our family's future. Robert was never going to retire voluntarily, and as long as he was married to her, we were never going to get what we deserved. What you deserved? The words came out sharper than I intended. And what exactly did you deserve, Jessica? The company. The life we should have had years ago. Her composure was finally cracking. Do you have any idea what it's been like, watching our friends advance in their careers while Daniel was stuck playing second fiddle to his stepfather? Watching you play the supportive wife while contributing nothing real to the business? Contributing nothing? I pulled out the client files I'd been reviewing. The Hendricks account. I developed that relationship. The Patterson Group. I landed that contract. Morrison Manufacturing. I've been their primary contact for 8 years. What exactly have you contributed, Jessica, besides sabotaging marriages and spending money you didn't earn? She grabbed the fabric samples she'd dropped, clutching them like a shield. I've been building our image, networking with the right people, positioning us for success. You wouldn't understand. You're just a secretary who got lucky, a secretary who owns the company you thought you were inheriting. That stopped her cold. She looked between Daniel and me, trying to process what she'd just heard. That's impossible, she whispered. Daniel handed her the incorporation documents with shaking hands. Read it yourself. I watched her scan the pages, watched her face go through the same progression of emotions Daniel's had. Confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning terror. This has to be fake. You're trying to trick us. Call Marcus Webb if you want confirmation. He's Robert's attorney. He'll explain the corporate structure in detail. Jessica sank into a chair, the fabric samples scattering around her feet like fallen leaves. But the divorce settlement, Robert signed everything over to Daniel. Robert signed over Morrison Industries. He never owned Morrison Holdings. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the air conditioning humming, the distant sound of traffic outside, the ticking of the clock on the wall. 2 days ago, these people had been celebrating their victory over me. Now they were staring at the wreckage of their carefully laid plans. What do you want? Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. Money? We can pay you. Daniel's been talking to investors about expansion capital. I don't want your money, Jessica. I want you to understand what you've done. You destroyed a marriage, manipulated my son, and threw me away like trash, all for a company that was never going to be yours anyway. But it could be, Daniel said desperately. Mom, you could sign it all over to me. You never wanted the business responsibilities anyway. You could retire, travel, enjoy yourself. The audacity was breathtaking. Yesterday, he'd told me I was too incompetent to run a company. Today, he wanted me to give him everything I owned. And why would I do that, Daniel? Because I'm your son. Because family should help family. Like you helped me yesterday when you threw me out of your house? Like you helped me for the past 3 years when you were sabotaging my marriage? My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it, then looked up at both of them with growing satisfaction. That was Patricia. The Hendricks account just canceled their contract with Morrison Industries. Apparently, Mrs. Hendricks was offended by your suggestion that her husband's business philosophy was outdated. Daniel's face went white. They can't do that. We have a contract. They have a contract with Morrison Holdings. I just instructed Patricia to terminate the subcontracting agreement that allowed Morrison Industries to service that account. You're destroying us! Jessica screamed, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering completely. You're destroying your own son. I'm giving you exactly what you gave me yesterday. The chance to figure out how to survive on your own. Daniel buried his face in his hands. The Patterson Group has been asking questions too. If we lose them, you'll lose them, I said calmly. Patricia is terminating all subcontracting agreements as of Monday morning. Morrison Industries will be solely responsible for its own operations, with whatever clients you can attract and retain on your own merit. Jessica stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You can't just destroy a company out of spite. I'm not destroying anything, Jessica. I'm simply withdrawing my support, the same way you withdrew your support from me yesterday. But we're family. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Are we? Because yesterday you told me I wasn't family anymore. You said I was an embarrassment who didn't belong in your new life. Jessica's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. Did you mean it when you orchestrated my divorce? Did you mean it when you introduced Robert to his secretary? Did you mean it when you told me to figure out where to live because I wasn't welcome in your home? She couldn't answer, because we all knew she'd meant every word. This isn't over, Jessica said, her voice shaking with rage and desperation. We'll fight this. We'll get lawyers. We'll prove you're an unfit owner, that you're doing this out of personal vendetta. Good luck with that, I said, gathering my papers. You'll need to pay those lawyers with money you don't have, while fighting a case you can't win against a woman who owns all the assets you thought you were going to inherit. As I walked toward the door, Daniel called after me. Mom, please. I know we made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can be a family again. I turned back to look at him, this stranger wearing my son's face. This man who'd spent 3 years plotting against me while I loved him unconditionally. Daniel, yesterday you taught me that family isn't about blood or history or shared experiences. Family is about respect, loyalty, and love. And you threw all of that away for money. So what happens now? He whispered. Now you learn to live with the consequences of your choices, just like I had to learn to live with the consequences of trusting you. I left them there in that conference room, surrounded by fabric samples for renovations they couldn't afford, holding documents that proved they'd never had the power they thought they'd won. By Monday morning, Morrison Industries would be on its own, without clients, without revenue, without the safety net they'd spent years taking for granted. As I walked through the lobby toward the exit, I passed the receptionist who'd tried to turn me away earlier. She looked up nervously. Mrs. Morrison, will you be coming in regularly now? I smiled at her. This young woman who was probably wondering if she'd still have a job next week. I'll be taking a much more active role in operations. Yes. What's your name? Sarah Martinez. Well, Sarah, if you're interested in learning about the real estate management side of the business, Morrison Holdings might have a position for someone with your skills. Hope flickered in her eyes. Really? As I walked to my car, I realized that this wasn't just about punishing Daniel and Jessica. It was about building something better from the ruins of what they'd tried to destroy. Robert had given me the tools to protect myself, but I was going to use them to create something worthy of the faith he'd placed in me. The war wasn't over yet, but for the first time in 2 days, I knew exactly who was going to win. 3 months later, I stood in the executive office that had once belonged to Robert, looking out at the city skyline through windows that were finally, truly, mine. The office had been redecorated, not with Jessica's cold, expensive modernism, but with warm, professional furnishings that reflected the values Robert and I had always shared. Family photos lined the credenza, but now they showed the family I'd chosen. Patricia, who'd become my operations manager. Sarah, who'd proven herself invaluable in client relations. And the other employees who'd stood by me when everything fell apart. The morning newspaper lay open on my desk, folded to the business section. The headline read, Morrison Holdings acquires 3 major manufacturing contracts. What it didn't say was that those were the same contracts Daniel had dismissed as small-time thinking, just before Morrison Industries collapsed. Patricia knocked on my door, carrying a stack of financial reports and wearing the confident smile of someone who finally worked for a company that valued her expertise. "The quarterly numbers are in," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Morrison Holdings is up 37% from last year. The Hendricks account alone has expanded into 2 new divisions since we took over direct management." I nodded, unsurprised. Mrs. Hendricks had been delighted to work directly with me again, telling everyone who'd listen that she'd never liked Daniel's arrogant approach to business. The Patterson Group had been equally relieved to return to our old collaborative model. It turned out that respect and relationship building were still valuable business skills, despite what Daniel had believed. "Any word from Morrison Industries?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Patricia's expression grew somber. "They filed for bankruptcy last week. The final papers were processed yesterday." I felt no satisfaction at the news, only a deep sadness for the waste of it all. Daniel had inherited a thriving subsidiary that could have grown into something remarkable under competent leadership. Instead, his arrogance and Jessica's greed had destroyed it in less than 4 months. What about Daniel himself? He's working at Jenkins and Associates now, entry-level position in their accounting department. Jessica? Patricia hesitated. What about Jessica? She filed for divorce 2 months ago. Moved back to her parents' house in California. Word is she's already engaged to someone else. Of course she was. Jessica had never been interested in Daniel himself, only what she thought he could provide. When the money disappeared, so did she. I almost felt sorry for my son. Except that he'd enabled her cruelty at every step. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I recognized but hadn't expected to see. "Mom?" Daniel's voice was quiet, hesitant. Could I come see you? I know I don't have the right to ask, but there are things I need to say." I looked out the window at the bustling city below, at the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of his betrayal. "I'm very busy these days, Daniel. Please, just 30 minutes. I'll come to your office, or we could meet somewhere neutral. Whatever you're comfortable with." The desperation in his voice was familiar. It was the same tone he'd used 3 months ago when he'd realized his world was crumbling. But there was something else there too, something that might have been genuine remorse. 30 minutes, I agreed. My office. This afternoon at 4. Daniel arrived precisely on time, looking like a man who'd aged years in just a few months. His expensive suit had been replaced by off-the-rack clothing, and his face carried the stress lines of someone learning to live paycheck to paycheck. He sat in the same chair where he'd begged for mercy 3 months earlier, but his posture was different now. Smaller, humbled, genuinely repentant. "Thank you for seeing me," he began, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I know I don't deserve it." "No, you don't. But I'm curious what you have to say." He took a shaky breath. "I wanted to apologize. Not because I want something from you, but because you deserve to hear it. What Jessica and I did was unforgivable. The way we treated you, the things we said, the way we destroyed your marriage and then threw you away." His voice broke slightly. "I can't live with myself knowing I hurt you that badly." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the calculated insincerity that had characterized so many of our recent interactions. But what I saw was genuine anguish, the kind that comes from truly understanding the magnitude of your mistakes. "Do you know what the worst part was, Daniel?" He shook his head. "It wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing that the son I'd raised, The boy I'd sacrificed everything for had disappeared completely, that the man sitting in front of me was someone I didn't recognize and didn't particularly like. Tears were running down his face now. I know, I became someone horrible. Jessica brought out the worst in me. But that's not an excuse. I made my own choices. I chose greed over family, money over love, and I lost everything that really mattered. Yes, you did. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued. I know I destroyed any right I had to call you my mother. But I needed you to know that I understand now what I threw away. Working for someone else, living in a one-bedroom apartment, having to budget for groceries. It's taught me things I should have learned years ago. Like what? Like how hard you worked to give me opportunities I took for granted. Like how much strength it took to raise me alone all those years before Robert came into our lives. Like what real family loyalty looks like, which is something I never showed you when it mattered. I was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. The Daniel who'd thrown me out of his house would never have admitted any of this. That man had been too proud, too convinced of his own superiority. This broken version of my son was someone I could almost recognize, someone who might actually be capable of growth. The company you destroyed, I said finally. It could have been something remarkable. Robert built it to last, to provide security for generations. You turned it into a get-rich-quick scheme. I know. And now it's gone forever because of my arrogance. Not forever, I said quietly. Morrison Holdings is hiring. We're expanding into new markets, taking on larger clients. We need good people who understand the value of hard work and loyalty. His eyes widened with hope, then immediately filled with suspicion. Mom, I can't let you give me a job out of pity. I'm not offering you a job. Daniel, I'm offering you a chance to earn one. Entry-level position, same as anyone else would start with. You'd work your way up based on merit, if you have any. You'd report to Patricia, and you'd have to prove every day that you've changed. And if I haven't? If I fall back into old patterns? Then you'll be fired, just like any other employee who doesn't perform. He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. Why would you do this? After everything I did to you? Because despite everything, you're still my son. And because Robert always believed people could change if they truly wanted to, I guess I'd like to find out if he was right about you. Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I don't know if I can be the man you raised me to be. Neither do I. But if you're willing to try, really try, then maybe we can find out together. 6 months later, I hosted my first family dinner in the house I'd bought with my own money, earned through my own efforts. It was smaller than the mansion Daniel and Jessica had briefly enjoyed, but it was mine completely. The dining room table was set for 4, myself, Patricia and her husband Jim, and Daniel. Daniel had proven himself in small ways over the past months. He arrived early every day, stayed late when needed, and treated every task with the seriousness of someone who understood that second chances were precious and rare. He'd also started seeing a therapist to work through the entitlement and greed that had nearly destroyed his life. The Morrison manufacturing expansion is ahead of schedule, Patricia reported over dinner. Daniel's analysis of their supply chain inefficiencies saved them almost $200,000 this quarter. I looked at my son, who was quietly cutting his roast beef with the same careful precision he now brought to everything. Good work. He looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw something in his eyes that looked like the boy I'd raised. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself. As we cleared the dinner dishes, Daniel lingered in the kitchen while Patricia and Jim moved to the living room. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? Really forgive me, not just give me opportunities to make amends? I considered the question seriously. I think forgiveness is something that happens gradually, Daniel. It's built through actions, not words. Every day that you choose to be better than you were, every time you put integrity before convenience, you earn a little more of it back. He nodded, understanding. And if I keep working at it? Then maybe someday we'll be family again. Real family, built on respect instead of obligation. As I watched him dry dishes with the same methodical care he now brought to his work, I realized that revenge had been satisfying, but redemption was something far more powerful. I'd destroyed Daniel's old life completely, but in doing so, I'd given him the chance to build something better. The woman who'd been thrown away like garbage had not only survived, she'd thrived. And maybe, just maybe, she'd saved her son in the process. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with the empire I'd built and the family I'd chosen to share it with.